Why leftists think that the right is more violent. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and I've been hashing this out in my head for a while when I think about the fact that there's all sorts of leftist activists, media personalities, and average left-leaning voters that say that they believe that the right is more violent. And I'm just wondering, do these people really mean it when they say such things? Obviously, we can assume that the red and blacks know perfectly well that they are dramatically more prone to instigating violence than right-wing people, which is why they always bring up the car incident in Charlottesville, conveniently ignore the congressional baseball game shooting, and generally just act like it doesn't matter that they unanimously start the physical confrontations, because according to them, the ends justify the means. Obviously, with the red and black weaponized Democrat stormtroopers, who would also go on to say that they hate the Democrats, but probably get money from people who give money to the Democrats. Obviously, in their twisted little imaginations, we're supposedly going to end up in an anarcho-communist utopia in the next couple of years, so it doesn't really matter how many people you have to sucker punch, pepper spray, and potentially even kill to get there. However, the issue becomes a bit more complicated when you think about media personalities who are a bit more intelligent and well-researched, who diabolically repeat the same narrative because they at least definitely know that there's only one political demographic in the United States that actually wants mob violence in the current year, and yet they continually victim blame the other side, encouraging it to happen more and more, probably because these media personalities feel that such political violence is ultimately beneficial to the people who pay them.
Despite the nation's intense national focus on Islamic terrorism since 9/11, homegrown right-wing extremists have also killed dozens of Americans. The groups include white supremacist and neo-Nazi groups and anti-federalist militias. Since 2001, the number of violent attacks on U.S. soil inspired by far-right ideology has spiked to an average of more than 300 a year.
That guy almost certainly knows all about the red and blacks and their comrades over in Black Lives Matter who were directly cited by the Dallas sniper. And of course, there's a great argument to be made for the fact that maybe Islamic societies are actually a left-wing ideology that merely treats men in the same type of supremacist way that Western nations treat women, in that Islamic governments offer tons of social welfare to its citizens and put men on a pedestal. However, I'm not here today to make that argument, nor talk about the different types of people either dressed in red and black or sitting behind blue check marks on Twitter that are willing to go ahead and say things that they know perfectly well are untrue about right-wing people being, on average, more violent than left-wing people. They know it's untrue. They say it anyway. However, I'm not really going to talk about that because I'm more interested in doing my best to explain to you what I believe is going through the minds of average, nice, left-leaning, non-violent voters who maybe simply have never seen any footage of the red and black sucker punching people in gangs or attacking them with weapons, and thus found it plausible when the nice, soft-spoken man warned them about the upcoming violence from Trump's supporters a few years ago.
Political ideology is something different. It is something terrifying. And that's where Trump and Trump's campaign has gone. This is Donald Trump's promise to his supporters. You protect him, you do what's necessary, and he'll protect you. He'll pay your legal fees, he'll back your lie. That's his promise. You protect him and he'll protect you. He'll use his money, his power, his anything. If they fix this problem, he will make sure they don't pay any consequences for it.
Yes, due to the pure chaos and downright misinformation that did legitimately find its way into the pop cultural zeitgeist, millions and millions of people believe that Trump was essentially encouraging violence just randomly. And again, it doesn't matter that we know for a fact, thanks to Project Veritas's undercover operation that Hillary Clinton's campaigners were paying people to incite violence at Trump rallies. No, that information never really made its way into the minds of the average voter on the left or center left, because although that information is easy enough to find, it unfortunately never made its way into the collective conscious. Probably because Clinton has the privilege of being perceived as less threatening due to being female and never admitted to provoking the violence that her campaigners were caught paying for herself. And yet still, beyond the fact that center-left, otherwise reasonable voters have been merely conditioned by lies and geographical removal from right-wing voters to the point where they simply have no evidence one way or the other which is more violent, left or right, still, left-wing people still have an inherent belief that right-wing people must theoretically be more violent. And some of the reasons that they feel this way are more obvious than others. The first would be that guns and weapons lobbying almost exclusively favors Republicans in the United States, which makes Democrats and Marxists of all varieties believe that anybody associated with right-wing politics must love guns. And if they love guns, they must love violence. Clearly, this isn't true, of course, but I don't really want to get into debunking that because it at least makes sense that leftists would think that. The next reason leftists think that the right is violent is because they associate the right with racial bigotry, very often because they know essentially nothing about history, aside from the fact that Hitler was supposedly a right-winger, and because they assume that the KKK was probably a bunch of Republicans, because they don't know that they were Democrats. This is a strange one in that it honestly just seems like a case of blatant misinformation, obviously, in that there's all sorts of racist people in literally every political party or geographical location because people are very prejudiced creatures. So why would people assume that the right is more racist? Because they are against solving racism with more racism? Like affirmative action? You see, in terms of what the political parties and greater philosophies actually stand for, the best simple way to describe it is that the Democrats are the party of identity politics, and they have long pandered to various different groups by appealing to the hopes of one group of citizens in the United States and those citizens' fears of other groups in the United States. Be it the demonizing of black people in the days of the Klan or demonizing white men like they do in the current year. On the flip side, the Republicans and right-leaning people generally tend to focus on individual rights and freedoms while maintaining various levels of value in a national identity that doesn't have much to do with anything regarding skin color, just so long as people immigrate legally. But, of course, the left believes that illegal immigrant is code for brown person because they project their own rampant and blatant racism onto literally everybody alive, and they also remember meeting some rednecks that were racist well over 10 years ago, and they thus assume that such people represent the right wing, and therefore, since those people might also enjoy hunting, it's plausible in their mind to believe that they also want to shoot Mexicans for sport, or something. The third thing that you need to remember about the leftist mind is that they have been so incredibly indoctrinated by 50 years of nonstop feminism that they believe that anybody who is critical of feminism is essentially advocating for violence against women. This is obviously not a rational fear in any way because there's not a single men's rights advocate activist, pickup artist, or MGTOW that I have ever even heard of that legitimately advocates for legalizing domestic violence, spousal rape, violence against women, or anything of that nature, including Rouge V, who wasn't even saying what they said that he was saying when he wrote the article about why there was an argument to be made that legalizing rape on private property would lead to less rapes happening. It's actually worth listening to what he was trying to get at, which he explains to Karen Strawn in the interview that I'm showing this screenshot of here. No, of course, MRAs don't actually want anybody to beat up or rape women, and Rouge V isn't even an MRA, but it absolutely doesn't stop feminist activists, bloggers, authors, professors, and otherwise gossipy women from repeating such lies. Because, of course, the argument against MRAs has never really been based in reality, but rather has always been about protecting the incomes of career feminists that realize that if the men who have been victimized by their policies came forward on a big platform, it could be the end of their careers. The fourth and most important reason that leftists assume that the right wing must be violent, even though they don't really know any right wing people, is because leftists are generally the type of people that are terrified of people who are assertive, confident, competitive, and brave. Obviously, it's a no-brainer that weak, cowardly people that are unwilling to compete would gravitate towards collectivist ideologies and identitarian movements, as they would be the first people to fear living in a world where they might have to fend for themselves. However, what's hard to explain is the way that these people are often completely willing to violently oppose individuals that aren't weak in such ways, to the point where they have no problem bullying such people and then essentially saying, no, they're the bully, even though we outnumbered them and we started it, because they're better at fighting than we are. Here's the thing. I think many leftists have no concept of the difference between a fair competition and a rigged competition. And I think that the reason why they don't understand that difference is that they've never really won much of any competition, aside from maybe waiting in the veritable bread line after being forced to settle for living in a world where they were left with the rigged competition. They were given the participation trophy. You see, a lot of these people maybe really were sincerely bullied by their siblings, their parents, or at school, to the point where they instinctually approached the world as if they are not allowed to stand up for themselves because they were bullied. So standing up for themselves meant that they would be beaten. I've actually certainly known a few people that were like that. They would never stand up for themselves because they didn't know it was possible. However, because of the fact that they have no ability to stand up for themselves in an unfair situation, or any capacity to attempt to compete in a vigorous challenge against worthy opponents, they have no understanding of the necessity for fairness and human decency when it comes to how we operate our competitions, societies, and government. No, instead, these people think of conflicts strictly in terms of situations where if they lose, it was because they were bullied. And if they win, it's because it was fair. Because for a seeming majority of them, they've never known a fair victory in their entire lives. Personally, while I was one of those kids that did get participation trophies in far leftist Seattle in the 1980s and 1990s, I always was much more proud of my gold medals from the track meets that I did actually earn, as well as the few times I ended up being the class science champion or my high school ping pong champion. Sure, those were just a few things that I could take pride in, but at least I had that. But then I remember that I was lucky and that I at least had the opportunity to participate in meritocratic competition as a child, which seemingly less and less kids get the chance to even do anymore. More so, I wasn't afraid of a competition, which most weak men are. Kids on the left are more likely to take dance or theater classes rather than competing in sports, so they don't really know what an unfair fight truly is. More so, they were not raised around gun owners, so they have no idea that these people don't shoot people regularly or pick fights for that matter. And when the leftists grow up, they almost never meet right-wing people to set them straight, so they don't know that they aren't Klansmen who want to lynch black people and have the right to legally rape women, or whatever they're imagining. And thus, well, these leftist people have no problem believing that anybody who has a problem with their worldview deserves to be physically confronted. Because, of course, the best defense against intolerant Americans is clearly a good offense or something.